Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Todd Banks, the Executive Director here at the Sherwood Park and District Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, members, for joining us here today. I know how difficult times are for you because of this pandemic, and I hear daily from many of you the challenges you have as business people. There's a great frustration, stress, uncertainty, and please know we at the Chamber are here to do everything we can to help you. With that said, it's my pleasure to welcome Garnett Genius, our Member of Parliament for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan Constituency this morning. Before Garnett's opening remarks, I would like all participants to know we have a list of questions on our Slido app that you can access in the chat window. There's a link if you go into the chat window, just click on that and you can put more questions into that app. The more people that like your question, it goes to the top of the app and it will be put in a priority of the most likes as the first question will be asked. So today we have Garnett Genius. He's a Member of Parliament for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan here in Alberta. Since his election in 2015, he has gained a reputation for being among the most outspoken parliamentarians, having spoken more than 100,000 words in the chamber during his first year in office, more than all three major party leaders combined. Always ready to speak, he is a tireless advocate for human rights and religious freedom, both domestically and abroad. In November 2019, MP Genius was appointed Shadow Minister for Multiculturalism. In January 2020, MP Genius was additionally appointed Shadow Minister for Canada-China Relations, a role through which he advocates for Canada's interests and values on the world stage. MP Genius holds a Bachelor of Public Affairs and Policy Management from Carleton University, a Master's of Science in Philosophy and Public Policy from the London School of Economics. Prior to his election, he worked in the Prime Minister's office. He and his wife, Rebecca, have 4 children. Garnett, please welcome, and please, we're very honored to have you here today.
Well, thank you so much, Todd. It's great to be with you and great to see so many people on the line. Great to see Councillor Parks and Berghofer joining us, and there may be other councillors that I didn't see as well as business leaders. I want to just identify that Malcolm from my office is on the call as well, so he'll be here taking notes, correcting me if I get any details wrong. And he's a resource for all of you. My constituency team have been working very hard. We're closed to walk-ins, but we're very much open, providing information and support to people. Malcolm, Leanne, and Madeline, as well as my team in Ottawa, are doing great work. So I want to thank them, and please don't hesitate to reach out to them about maybe the particulars of your circumstances, and also if you want to talk to me directly. I am working from home like most people are. So if you hear children in the background, that's what that is. But I've got a headset here which should manage the noise fairly well. I thought what I would do today is kind of 3 main things. We had a great presentation through the Sherwood Park Chamber a couple weeks ago from Brad Severin that went very effectively into the specific programs and supports that are available. Now things are constantly changing, and that was a couple weeks ago, which sometimes feels like 10 years in the midst of the times we're in. But nonetheless, I won't go too much into sort of repeating what he said, but I will still, for those that maybe were not there, do a general overview of what the programs are available, and we can go more into that in response to questions. I want to talk a little bit about where I see all of this going into the future, and some of the debates and conversations around yeah, where are we going to be in the next 2 months, 6 months, next year, in terms of our public health response, in terms of the economy, and share some thoughts about what that I think means for business leaders. And then finally, I just want to share a little bit about the political environment, about kind of the tools that are available to me, and how I can and am advocating for you, and maybe what opportunities I have to take feedback I'm going to get on this call about the programs that are available, and turn those into conversations that are happening in Parliament. So to start off with, then I'll provide an overview of some of the programs. And by the way, there's the is the chat function available? Because I was going to drop a few links. Yeah, so the chat function is available. So I'll be just dropping a few links in there as I talk. The first one is a good kind of overview of programs available as well. So I'll be talking about these programs, but use that link to dig into more information, please. So we have the uh, Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy Program. It's a subsidy that covers 75% of employees' wages up to $847 per week. It's for employers across all sectors, and it applies to those who have suffered a drop in gross revenue of at least 15% in March and 30% in April and May. The program is currently set to be in place for a 12-week period, which takes us to June 2020. One of the questions that I've been getting from business leaders already is, what happens after June 6th? What happens if we're still struggling, if we have to let people go again after June 6th? The answer, unfortunately, is I don't know. But that is the structure of the wage subsidy program as it exists. There's the Canada Emergency Business Account, or Seba, that provides interest-free loans of up to $40,000 to small businesses and not-for-profits, covering operating expenses. It applies to organizations who have paid between $20,000 and $1.5 million in total payroll in 2019. There are some gaps, some cracks, if you like, that people can fall through, and we've been doing advocacy around these gaps. One of the key ones is business owners who have maybe been don't meet that payroll requirement because the business owner or others within their company are being compensated through dividends. So we've tried to make the case that there shouldn't be sort of adverse treatment of those who are getting income through dividends, or those businesses that are compensating people through dividends. So also there's some issues around eligibility criteria in terms of the revenue decline, whether businesses that are suffering would be showing the revenue decline required to access that program. So there's some gaps. We've been hearing about those gaps, and we're doing our best to encourage the government to remedy those. There's the Business Credit Availability Program. This is where BDC and the EDC are trying to increase credit available in a variety of sectors. And they're working with financial institutions to kind of co-lend to different businesses. Again, some gaps we're hearing about that, and working on remedying them. I'm going to just identify that the emergency rent assistance, KECRA, I think would be how you'd pronounce that acronym. Now, this is the government aiming to provide some kind of rent support to small businesses. The way this is being provided, though, is it's being provided through commercial property owners. So the government is providing support to the property owners, various forms of support that's conditional upon them providing certain rent relief to their customers. One of the challenges, and I know it came up in some of the advanced questions that I saw for this conversation, the concern that basically landlords have to go and ask for it. They have to seek to participate if that's going to apply to their renters. So it's not universally available to everyone. I will say this does speak to kind of one of the issues we deal with often in Canada, which is the interaction between federal and provincial jurisdiction. So this is the federal government creating a program around rent relief, but generally speaking, rules around rent and tenancy would fall under provincial jurisdiction. So this is that maybe explains some of the challenges around that. Everyone here is probably familiar with the CERB, which is to individuals, not to businesses as such, although self-employed individuals can apply for the CERB as well. So if you're a business owner and you've personally experienced a drop in income, then you're eligible for the CERB. I'll get a bit more into this as we talk about kind of coming out of this, but one of the issues we've identified as a real priority in terms of advocacy is that right now you get the CERB if you make less than $1,000 a month. If you make $1,001, you lose your entire CERB. Now, this creates a real challenge for people that are maybe in a position where they could re-enter the workforce on a part-time basis, because you might want to be able to start working part-time, but you can't fully support your family, your needs on that part-time wage. So your only option is to keep collecting CERB and not work at all, or at least keep your earnings under that $1,000 threshold. So you could describe this as a disincentive, or in whatever way. The reality is, it puts people who are interested in getting into part-time work in a totally impossible situation, because they would like to work, they would like to support the restart of our economy, but they can't if it means they're so much worse off by working that they can't effectively take care of their needs and the needs of their family. So that's a key advocacy priority for us as well. So that's kind of an overview of the programs the way they are. So from the beginning, just talk about kind of some of the larger context, and as we think about the future. So from the beginning of this crisis, we've been in the opposition trying to identify the effective tools that are being used in other countries to manage the pandemic response. You can look cross-nationally at the data, what countries are doing things that work and what countries are doing things that aren't working. And as far as I'm concerned, the leading examples of effective pandemic response have been Asian democracies, especially South Korea and Taiwan. South Korea and Taiwan experienced cases of COVID-19 much, much earlier, and they were able to manage them effectively, perhaps through the fact that they have greater experience dealing with pandemics, and there are various theories about why they were able to respond more effectively. But it's very clear in the case numbers that Taiwan, despite the political tensions with the mainland, there was a lot of sort of people-to-people intercourse that does happen, and yet, in spite of that, they were very effective in managing the response, and they did not have to experience the level of economic disruption or disruption to sort of regular life that we've had here. They did a few things, different combinations of things. There was a big emphasis on testing, high levels of available testing. Also tracing, identifying where the virus has been, and notifying people who may have been exposed to the virus. Less so in South Korea, but in Taiwan there were border measures in terms of trying to limit people from coming into the country who might have been exposed to COVID-19. And the other thing is masking. It is much more sort of culturally common in East Asian countries for people to be out and about with masks on, and some of that is the history of past pandemics. There's I guess conflicting advice in Western countries around masking. Initially, people were told that you shouldn't wear masks, and then fortunately, I think eventually that public health advice was revised, and now the CDC in the United States, Canadian public health is encouraging the use of masks. The issue with masks was there was concerns about a shortage and about healthcare workers not being able to access them. But the point has been made that you can use a homemade mask or a cloth face covering, and that does certainly provide a measure of protection for other people in receiving particulates that may come from individuals. So this combination of measures in East Asian countries has been very effective. What does that mean for us now going forward for the future? Well, I think Canada needs to think very strategically about the kinds of adaptations in the short and medium term before we have effective treatments, before we have vaccines. Between now and then, how can we go to something like normal life, where we're still able to be out and about, where our businesses can be up and running, but where we're still able to be safe? And I think we can try to find those adaptation measures where people are taking advantage of the opportunity to mask, where there's testing available, there's tracing. And I think all of us as governments, but as business leaders as well, need to think strategically about how we can deploy adaptation measures that will allow us to have a vibrant, active economy again, while still being able to protect ourselves. It's not an either or. We either pretend the virus isn't there and go back to hugging each other and shaking hands, hello, or on the other hand, we just stay in our house. There's a middle way where we adapt. I mean, there's different elements you could imagine of being part of this. One might be, we can visit seniors' homes again, but there's efficient testing. So you have to go and get a test before you go in to visit people. Combining that testing with an adaptation. What about people being able to wear servers being able to wear masks in restaurants, greater spacing, maybe the use of barriers, sort of less open concept, more use of barriers to keep the flow of limited if somebody sneezes. So these are the kinds of adaptations that I know a lot of people are thinking about. And my encouragement to all of you as you think about the path to reopening would be to think about those kinds of adaptations that allow us to start our economy up again while still also protecting ourselves. So I'll just drop into the chat as well. My wife is a physician, and she and I wrote an op-ed together for the Epoch Times talking about kind of moving to a new normal in the midst of the pandemic. And so those who are more interested, who are interested in this discussion, this was, I think it was about a month ago that it was published. So some of the ground has shifted a little bit, but that gives you a bit of a sense of where very much I still think is where we're going, where we need to be prepared to go. All right, so I'll just move to this final point, which is talking a little bit about the political environment. I don't think that Canada was well prepared for this pandemic. Our response has been better than some countries, certainly, but there were measures we could have taken earlier that would have, I think, given us a little bit more time and limited the kind of the need for the kind of disruption that we've had to experience. So, one of the things that I am calling for is kind of an effective identification of where those gaps were, so that we can be better prepared for the future. That means adaptations, but that also means having the necessary stockpiles of things like masks. It's come out that there was a stockpile of masks that was destroyed and not replaced a couple of years ago, and also that we sent vital PPE equipment to China kind of right as this was starting. So some of these are things that require further discussion. Also, various countries, Australia, the European Union, among others, are calling for an investigation, an independent international investigation into the origins of COVID-19. The fact that we were not getting good data early on from China and through the WHO, I think limited our ability to assess the scope of the problem effectively. So an independent international investigation would go a long way. In particular for our local businesses, as we think about adaptation as we think about kind of the gradual restart to our economy that needs to happen. It's very important that we have policies in place that support that restart. If we don't have sufficient flexibility within the CERB to allow people to do part-time work while maintaining some elements of their benefits, I am concerned that businesses will struggle to access the labor that they need. Even with very high levels of unemployment, a gradual restart requires a sloping of benefits instead of just you're either on the benefit or you're not. So that is a key issue for us. If businesses are gonna adapt and they're going to be restarting, they have to be able to access labor at a more moderate level as they restart. Restaurants have to be able to say to their staff, could you start to come in for a couple shifts here and there? And the same is true for other kinds of businesses as well. So as we think about the future and the political environment, advocating on this issue is very, very important. And I'd love to hear your feedback as well. What you're seeing in terms of the impact on labor supply of the way in which CERB is structured. How can we ensure that people have the supports they need while also being able to go back to work without losing those supports? The structure of Parliament as it exists right now is we are suspended from our kind of regular sitting schedule. We have once a week on Wednesdays, we're having these parliamentary accountability sessions for a couple hours in person where a small number of MPs go in, are spaced out within the parliamentary chamber, and are able to ask questions of ministers. It is on those days where the government has, at points in time in the past, put forward legislation. And as an opposition, they need our cooperation in order to allow legislation to pass in at least an expedited way. But we're doing everything we can to be responsible. We don't want to, we recognize that we don't have a majority and we're not going to drag our heels needlessly. But there have been a number of cases where we have worked hard to negotiate and pressure the government to make changes to some of the things they plan to do in order to make programs better. That doesn't mean that we don't think there are still problems, but we've been able to use the leverage that we have in a minority parliament and also the kind of special circumstances to try and advance concerns that are a priority for our constituents. So we have these accountability sessions. They're once a week, and we also have what's being called a virtual parliament, 2 additional days a week, where people can ask questions of ministers virtually. And there have been a lot of technological hiccups along the way, but we're trying to figure it out. My preference would be for more in-person sessions, given that we've demonstrated that we can meet and do that effectively. That I think is it lends itself better to the kinds of discussions that we need to have, and it doesn't have the same kind of technical problems. We can talk more about that if people are curious to dig into it. But the opportunities exist for me to bring forward the concerns that I hear from you, but they are fairly limited. It's a couple hours a week sort of thing with a little bit of that add-on on the digital side, but we don't have a huge amount of time or opportunity to do that. And I'm hearing a lot of concerns from different constituents, which I'm trying to distill in the time that I have. I was able to ask a question to the Minister for Small Business and Tourism a couple of weeks ago, where I focused on some of these issues around, specifically around small business programs, around the payroll cutoff, for example. And I want to thank Brad in particular for bringing those issues to my attention. The other channel that I have for raising issues that are a concern for businesses is petitions. In the in-person as well as the online settings, we have an opportunity to table petitions. And so if there are specific items that you bring to my attention that you want me to put forward in Parliament, one way for me to do that is through the presentation of a petition, and my staff can work with you to get the wording in the right format. And at that point, you only need 25 signatures. So obviously, it's not a good time to be going door to door or sitting in the mall asking people to sign. But you can email the petition to all your friends, ask them to print it off, sign it, and mail it to my office. Then we can put together the stack of signatures and table it in the House of Commons. And when you present a petition, it's one of my favorite formats for using, because the government has to then table a response within a certain number of days. So it's a good way to put concern on the record and then require a government response. So it could be something very, very specific. If someone on here says there's a specific issue that negatively impacts mortgage brokers, and I want a petition on the impact on mortgage brokers, absolutely happy to work with you on a petition on that. You know, if there are specific issues you're identifying where there are gaps, even if they're very specific to one sector or one business, we'll work with you on getting a petition up on that as soon as possible, and using whatever other channels there are to raise those issues. So thanks again to Todd and the Chamber for this opportunity, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Garnett. So as I mentioned before, we have a Slido app with the link down in the chat window. You can put more questions into that application, or you can upvote any of the questions that are already there so that we can ask in priority the most important questions of the membership. And right now, our number one question, which I hear quite often, and it is very timely here. There is talk of helping businesses with less than $20,000 payroll. What is being done to help these businesses? And Garnett, as you know, that is the payroll of $20,000 to $1.5 million for businesses. Don't know if you have any updates or suggestions for that.
Well, so that's the Seba, the business account issue, and this is an issue. I mentioned the question I'd asked to the Minister for Small Business and Tourism. This is a question I specifically asked her, identifying the case of dividends. There's also the case of maybe the startup or the family-run business, where people are kind of all chipping in, but they're not. You know, they're not over the payroll threshold. I asked the question, and the Minister told me everything's on the table. You know, so I'm sorry to say I don't have any further updates than something may or may not be on the table. But this continues to be an advocacy priority for us, certainly ensuring that that all businesses can access that loan, and you know, hopefully we'll be able to see some movement on it at some point.
Thank you, Garnett. I know the Canadian Chamber and the Alberta Chamber is also working on that. So thank you for your help in that area. Our next question, when is the rent subsidy, when will it start, and how to apply? And we do have that information on our website, but Garnett, please give us your thoughts on that as well.
Well, sure. As I talked about it, I mean, the mechanics of this rent support program is through the application by the property owner. So in terms of how to apply, that is a bit of a limitation, that it's through the property owner. In terms of the timing of this, just see if I have it in my notes here. Yeah, my understanding as well is that program details are still somewhat in the process of being finalized, but you can also sign up through CMHC, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, who are responsible for administering the program. You can sign up there in order to receive details directly from them as the application process opens up further. And if you want to follow up with my office, we can give you more information on how to do that. But Malcolm, is it just a matter of people go to the CMHC website, they can do that sign up to get the information?
Yeah, so if you want further details on that, feel free to contact us. I can send you that information. But yeah, it is on the CMH. CMHC website. They have
Okay.
announced that the applications aren't up and running yet. Hopefully by mid-May, but you can sign up to receive details.
Okay. One thing I should just add on that, one of the proposals that we put forward as the opposition that we didn't get any uptake on was that businesses could keep the GST that they'd collected, and this was, the many of these programs, there's delays in the application, there's complexity around them. We made the proposal that businesses being able to keep the GST that they collected just provides them with an administratively simple, immediate shot in the arm that they can use to stay afloat, and it applies across the board in all circumstances. But it doesn't look like that's happening.
Thanks, Garnett. That's kind of a double-edged sword, because we have members, obviously, that have storefronts and are looking for some help with their rent, but we also have landlords that have large developments that are looking at this as a challenge to them, because this says to them, it's the only program that's out there right now that the government's saying you only get 75% of your revenues, where everyone else gets a revenue with no discounts on it. So as much as it's a terrible situation for our storefronts that have landlords, the landlords also have loans that now they're trying to pay with only 75% of the funding. So it is quite a difficult situation in that program.
Yeah.
The next question we have, and it's about travel and tourism. So Alberta, the four major industries here are oil and gas, agriculture, lumber and forestry, and tourism. The tourism industry has taken a big hit. And the question is, what is currently being done to assist, and can more be done?
Yeah, I mean, there is not targeted support to that sector. It is something that we've called for. We Conservatives put out a statement on April the 13th calling on the government to put forward a specific action plan aimed at a few sectors, including the tourism sector, and also trying to give businesses the tools to open their doors again in a way that's safe, and that kind of comes back to the adaptation piece. This is one area where the GST remittance proposal, people keeping the GST, would have, I think, been helpful. But yeah, we're calling for targeted support there, recognizing those impacts, and nothing has come forward to date. It is important to recognize the differential impacts, right? Because I guess my concern is that you think about the next, where we're going to be in the next 6 to 12 months. There are going to be some sectors that are going to, some businesses that people are just going to start using again as soon as they need to, because they need to. There are other things that are more elective that people will be nervous coming into, or that are dependent on income. I mean, fortunately, I don't think there are any cruise ship operators that are members of the Sherwood Park Chamber. But I mean, that's one example of a sector that's going to be disproportionately hard hit, right? So I think that kind of focused approach is important.
Our next question is about SECRA again, and I think Malcolm's already got a website to address this question. So I think we'll skip that one and go down to the next question. And does Canada need to take a more Canada first approach for the economy and supply chains of essential goods like masks? And I would also include in there all pharmaceuticals and even research and development as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And I mean, some of this language can mean different things to different people. So just for clarity, I might use the terminology of security, right? We have to think about security of supply, security that we can get the things we need in critical moments and know that those things are of a certain quality. And there's a lot of examples in the midst of the COVID-19 situation that illustrate that this is an important area for us to delve into. One is masks. I mean, we received a whole bunch of, I think 1 million masks from China that were not up to a usable standard in healthcare facilities. And there was, some controversy around what were briefly sort of proposed limits on export from the U.S. to Canada of some vital equipment as well. So I think we need going forward a strategy that identifies these critical products and ensures their security. That means, I mean, ideally getting those things from Canada, but also developing stronger partnerships with like-minded allies who are prepared to make legally binding commitments around supply, and where we can trust the standards and the quality and the information that's coming out. One of the issues in particular that this raises is the nature of our commercial and otherwise relationship with the Chinese government. There I think is a lot of very good evidence that there was a cover-up of information around the COVID-19 outbreak in Wuhan, that the Chinese state was directly censoring on WeChat, which is a main kind of Chinese social media, that they were censoring conversations specifically in an intentional way around this new emerging virus, and the intentional suppression of information and conversation around this outbreak is a big part of the reason for the magnitude of the challenges that we face today. So this, one of the lessons to learn here is that we have to understand the nature of authoritarian systems, the fact that it is in the DNA of authoritarian systems to repress information, especially information that could be seen as bad for the reputation of the regime. And we have to develop closer commercial ties as an alternative with like-minded governments, where we can have greater confidence in the quality of the information and in the fact that people won't be vulnerable who engage in commerce there. So I think that the greater emphasis on security as part of our economic growth is going to be one of the strands coming out of this, and I think it's important. I think it's something that we should all take seriously and shouldn't lose sight of. There's going to be other issues coming up in the next little while around the Canada-China relationship, whether Huawei has access to 5G, for example, the ongoing issues of detained Canadians, and we've seen the detention of people from Canada who are doing business in China, who are business leaders seeing opportunities, and then find themselves detained as part of a kind of political tit for tat. So these are security issues that need to be top of mind for us.
Thanks, Garnett. So the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy is extremely complex with lots of opportunities for errors. Will the opposition recommend an easing of the extremely punitive penalties? And I would like to add to that I was on a call with the Canadian Chamber and the CRA, and they mentioned that it's not a question of if you subscribe to one of these programs, if you get audited, you will be audited for this. So if you make a mistake, these penalties are huge. Is there something that can be done to make sure that honest businesses are not going to be penalized because of a complex program?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's not something that I have advocated on yet, as I appreciate members bringing this issue to my attention, and it's something I'd be very happy to work to highlight, because you're absolutely right. It doesn't make sense to kind of overly penalize people that are acting in good faith and maybe make a mistake in the context of an application. Maybe this is an issue on which a petition effort would be warranted, but it's also I'll follow up with our finance team on that and see what we can do to advocate more on it.
Okay. Thank you for that. This is from one of our councillors here in Strathcona County. I have had concerns brought to me by businesses that have opened within the past year and their inability to access any of the federal programs. That there's many businesses that are in that situation.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this is a big problem, and it's a gap, and it's one that I have raised. Malcolm, maybe if you can just find the video clip exchange of me with the Minister for Small Business and Tourism, and drop it in the chat, because this is one of the issues I identified in that exchange with her, as well as recently opened businesses. So I'm sorry I don't have any good news to deliver on that front either, but I agree it's a problem.
Okay, thanks, Garnett. We are a recreation business, which is non-essential. Possibly the last to open with many restrictions. Will there be any federal assistance then when I really need it? Garnett, maybe I could just add to that. So they are scheduled to be in stage 3 to open up. And when they do open up, there's probably going to be some pretty heavy restrictions on them. So not only do they have to wait the longest, but the restrictions could be very strenuous on the pocketbook for them to be able to operate.
Yeah. Yeah, so no announcements have been made specifically with respect to that. It makes sense, as the questioner points out, that there would be a kind of an unfolding of benefits that reflect the gradual process of reopening. There are going to be some businesses that are impacted more than others, as I said, and especially those in the tourism recreation sector. The things that are that give life added spice, but are not strictly speaking essential for people. Those are the areas where I mean, I think there will be more challenges over a longer period of time. For what it's worth, I mean, that we're seeing new measures, new programs announced from the government on a very regular basis, and some of these are kind of short-term programs responding to kind of the short-term time horizon. So I know it's the preference of everybody that they're able to see kind of what programs will apply to them in 6 months. Again, we don't even know where we'll be with the wage subsidy program after the kind of early June cutoff. But I mean, I expect that there will be more announcements of different extensions, different measures, more tailored measures as we go forward. It's just that we don't have the certainty to know what those would exactly look like.
Thank you for that. So we have a question now. Can you explain how the $40,000 Seba loan works? And once again, that is on our website, sherwoodparkchamber.com. Right on our main page, you can go on and click on the red COVID-19 link, and all the federal, provincial, and municipal information is available there for businesses. But Garnett, if you would like to.
So I'll just kind of go over it in general. So the program envelope is about $25 billion. As I said in the intro, it's an interest-free loan of up to $40,000 to small business, and it applies to not-for-profits as well, covering operating costs during a period where revenues have been temporarily reduced due to the economic hardship associated with COVID-19. repaying the balance of the loan on or before December 31st, 2022 will result in loan forgiveness of 25% of that loan up to $10,000. And the mechanism for application is through your financial institution. And we can always provide more details to you. You can apply for it through a bank or a credit union, and this was one of the issues that we had highlighted in the process of the construction of the program, the inclusion of credit unions. One hurdle that we've identified as well in the program is that there are some small businesses where they don't use a business account; they do their small business banking through a personal account, and unfortunately, the way the program is structured right now, as far as I know, that hasn't been, if it's been remedied in the last day or two, I haven't heard about it. Brad can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's a problem that remains, that if you do your banking through a personal account, not a business account, your business banking through a personal account, which is, perfectly legal and people do it, then you're not able to access this.
Okay, thank you. So we're getting down to the last questions here. This one's very, very important to Alberta. Is more relief coming to oil and gas? And I know there was an announcement a little bit about oil and gas, but it was also left with a mark saying that more would be coming within hours.
Yeah.
And it's vital to our economy that that industry gets more help.
Yeah. I agree. I think there are two parts to this, right? There's for the energy sector, there's the immediate needs of the sector, and then there's the kinds of measures that would give people long-term confidence in the political environment around the sector. The immediate support was promised. The finance minister said, I think it's been almost a month and a half now, saying that it was within days, if not hours, were I think his precise words, and that may be an indication of what he wanted to do, but what the rest of the cabinet and the Liberal caucus were not going to support. There have been some stories written suggesting kind of sharp internal divisions on this. And you saw it in the context of the debate on the Tech Frontier project, which was sort of prior to all this COVID stuff. But there were members of the Liberal caucus sort of openly campaigning for the Tech Frontier project, which had been approved by independent experts. They were openly campaigning for that project to be blocked by cabinet. So you see indications that I think more than ever, even if there are maybe a few ministers who want to send sort of supportive, conciliatory signals to Alberta and to the energy sector, that there is a very strong internal push against this. To be frank about it, the Prime Minister has spoken in the past about wanting to phase out our energy sector, and there are if that were to happen, there would be devastating economic consequences, not just for Alberta but for the whole country. But we're in a circumstance where the government, if that's what they want to do, they can do a lot of damage just by not intervening. But so you have these inconsistencies in terms of what the finance minister has said and some other people have said. So there's sort of still an unknown hanging over all this. But what we've called for in the opposition, we've called for areas of direct support. We've also called for projects, energy-related projects that are in the queue to be expedited. My colleague Shannon Stubbs and Pierre Poliver, many of you will know Shannon. She's from the neighboring riding over, and she's our Shadow Minister for Natural Resources. They wrote an op-ed saying, there's over $20 billion of projects, energy-related projects that are in the queue, and expediting the approval of these projects would be a public money free stimulus for our economy, and all the government has to do is say yes. So these are political choices that are in front of us, and we're going to certainly in the opposition, we're going to continue to advocate for the importance of our energy sector, for those short-term kind of stimulative measures, but also for the kind of long-term supports that we need. Just sending a message that Canada is open for the energy business. We've got a lot of resources. There's a lot of great opportunities, and we're going to work to get these projects moving forward. I know it's a few of you have brought to my attention this news about Canadian oil being sent from the west to the east through the Panama Canal. And, if there wasn't a case to be made for pipelines, it would be the sort of circuitous route by which some of our energy resources are traveling. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And there are so many opportunities in the sector for us to prosper into the future. And I remain very optimistic about that potential, but sometimes the politics has gotten in the way, and that's where we're at right now.
Thanks, Garnett. We'll have one more question for you, and then if you want to do some closing remarks, we're down to 8 minutes here. This is probably a bit of an open-ended question, but it would be great to hear your perspective on this. What does Canada need to do now to be a strong economy relative to other nations when we come out of COVID-19?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question and an important one. I think adaptation and general pandemic preparedness is a big part of this. People said, a few people have said about the COVID-19 situation, well, nobody saw this coming. Nobody knew this could happen, and I don't think that's true. I mean, in 2004, there was the global SARS pandemic, and it obviously didn't have the impacts that COVID-19 has had. But there was a lot of sort of analysis and debate about why that happened, and it was in the aftermath of that situation that we created the Public Health Agency of Canada. That was supposed to be primarily focused on being ready for a pandemic of this nature. And we weren't ready. We didn't have the masks, we didn't have the equipment, we didn't have the protocols in place. And we've seen countries that have had an effective response. They've had digital tracing tools. They've got up and running with testing very, very quickly. They were able to expedite approvals of tests and things like that. And people were able to adapt quickly through all of this. And so they didn't have to have the same kind of, South Korea, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, they ran an election, right? Like they had actual people going out and voting in an election, and that just shows what they were able to do while still effectively managing the virus, because they were ready, because they had the stores, the supplies, and the tools in place to do it. And I think this is about our safety and our security, but it's also it will give a lot of confidence to people to be engaged economically, to invest in Canada, if they see a readiness such that we're not vulnerable to this kind of disruption in the future. And part of that is having that security around supply of essential goods, an ability to ensure that when this sort of thing happens, we're able to get all the equipment and the ventilators and such up and running very quickly. So that's being ready for the you can't ever be necessarily ready for the unknown unknowns, but a pandemic is kind of a known unknown. We didn't know what it would be or when it would hit, but we should have known ever since at least SARS that something like this could happen, and it could have a big impact. And there were a certain set of things we needed to do to be prepared for responding to it. But more broadly, in terms of the success of our economy, it's easy to forget kind of what was big in the news before COVID-19, but I think it's relevant that the crisis we were dealing with before this was a situation where a relatively small number of protesters were able to effectively, for a period of time, shut down big swaths of our national rail network. Um, and there was, for a while, just it didn't seem to be a will in many cases to enforce the rule of law and ensure that our transportation infrastructure could continue to operate. You talk about the oil and gas sector. There are all kinds of projects that are common sense, that will actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that need to be able to go forward. For Canada's economy to succeed, we need to be the kind of country that inspires confidence in investors, and that is a place where things can get built even if some people disagree. If we're able to send those messages, if we're able to have legislative frameworks and commitment to enforcement when it makes sense, so that if investors see a project that works, that makes sense, and the community is generally on side, then they know that they can go forward with it without it being disrupted. And we're going to have a hard time getting the investments that we need if we're seen as a country with political risk. I spoke to an ambassador a couple months ago who said that, well, people in my country are interested in maybe investments in Canada, but there's concerns about political risk. We need to address the political risk to vital projects if we want to succeed economically in the future. But if we take care of our security needs, and if we address the political risk side of it, we've got an incredibly educated and innovative population. We've got top-notch innovative business leaders. We have strong institutions. We have abundant natural resources. We've got a lot of great things going for us as a country in the long term. So I'm optimistic about our potential if we can confront and address some of these specific challenges that we need to going forward. And I guess since we're near the wrap-up point, I'll just say I really appreciate the partnership of the Sherwood Park Chamber, the Fort Saskatchewan Chamber, and the National Chambers Network. If you have concerns about policy issues, you can bring them to my attention, but you can also use the advocacy tools that exist through the chamber, which help people in other parts of the country know about the challenges we're facing. And also the National Chamber Network has a very strong voice in Ottawa, bringing issues to the attention of parliamentarians of all parties. So please keep me informed of the issues that are important to you, but also use those vital advocacy channels that are available through the chamber. And I want to thank Todd and all of you for the great work that the chamber is doing in this and so many other respects.
Thank you, Garnett. Very, very pleased that you had an hour for us today to answer these questions on SECRA and CUES and SERB and Seba and all these programs that are out here to help during these difficult times. Hopefully you can get the ear of the ministers that represent each one of those programs and let them know of our concerns. And I want to thank you for all the things you do in our community. It's very difficult times for everyone. Our membership is hurting terribly economically during these times, but I know everything that I've had as concerns from our membership, and I've contacted your office about. You've replied in a timely manner, and hopefully we can get to an end to this sooner than later. And thank you to the members for participating today. And it's very difficult times, and we're here to help you. Our office is closed, but as you can see, I'm here at the office today, and our staff are at home working off-site, but our board meets on a regular basis. We discuss all these issues, and the direction has been, and leadership's been great from our board as well. So I want to thank everyone for participating today. Thank you, Garnett. We have maybe 3 questions left here that, if you don't mind, we'll forward them to you, and we'll get a response from you for those. And have a great day, and thank you all for attending. Appreciate it.
Excellent. Take care, everyone.